That makes sense.
Yeah, so cut that part out.
Yeah, this part, we're now officially in the podcast.
Yeah, perfect. Whoops.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for taking the time for joining me today, Allison. It's great to have you on, and it's great to see your face again, reconnect.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
For anyone who doesn't know you, could you share a little bit about the path that has led you to where you are now and how you got into medicine and kind of what the catalyst was for your interest in and experience with psilocybin?
Yeah, so I have always been a healer. Even as a kid, I knew I was going to end up in healthcare in some way. My mom is a nurse. So I grew up really just idolizing her, and she's still one of my mentors and best friends. And so I actually was a registered nurse first and worked in the ICUs and ERs for a little over 5 years before I decided to go back. Now I am a family nurse practitioner, which in the region where I live, that's we practice independently. So it's very much like a physician
Right.
and specialized in emergency medicine for a very long time, well over 10 years. And while I love that, it's a very intense environment to work in. And so after about a decade and a half, I decided it was time to move away from that environment and really started researching more about healing. Because in emergency medicine, we fix a lot of problems and we get people to see another day,
Hmm.
right? But we don't really deal with root cause healing at all. And I was finding that a lot of people's problems were recurrent. They were the same issues over and over because we're not dealing with that initial root cause.
Right.
So I just followed the research. I grew up very much a rule follower and sort of prudish and not a lot of drug use. And so it surprised myself that I was going more and more towards psychedelic medicine, right? Like
Mhm.
I was raised in this say no to drugs and dare programs and all that.
Yeah,
And
the puppet
really,
commercials.
yeah, exactly. And really taught that psychedelic drugs were bad. And of course, because of that, research really fell off. And in the last 10 years, that research is coming back, which is great and it's super compelling. So I found myself really going towards more mental health and psychedelic science to answer some of those problems about recurrent problems and people not being well.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about the current science other than I believe there's some European countries that are really implemented like centers for recovery and for healing for addictions and PTSD and those types of things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's two, well, there's more research coming out every day. So when this podcast gets, published, it's already
Yeah,
probably not going to be current because it's just that
all the time.
that much is coming out. There are countries who never made it illegal. And so they have been able to give us some data, but it's not really up to like the US or I'm sure, other countries, but to their standards for really rigorous drug testing and that sort of
Right.
thing. So that's the kind of things that we're doing now with MDMA and psilocybin and
Yeah.
even LSD, at least in the US, they're doing some very cool clinical trials. So we're going to get more information on that.
It definitely seems well, and even just from my own experience, I do believe psilocybin has helped. I describe it in my mind as like Tetris that's incomplete. And if I have all these kind of incomplete lines, somehow with psilocybin in my system, I can ask questions and answer them in real time, and it completes these lines and kind of clears space in my psyche, I
Mm.
believe. So that's kind of how I envision it in myself because I don't really know what happens, but I know that after I just feel lighter. Nothing's changed. But I'm like, oh, that's good. That's a positive thing. And now just life feels different. And so whatever
Mhm.
happens, it is exciting for me as well. And just to have a guide through that process or some sort of explanation as to what is going on. Other than I'm just going to experiment a bit and see what happens. And it turns out it's been good. So
Yeah, and I think a lot of people historically have come to psychedelic medicine in that way, or plant medicine, is a lot of people come at it from the party,
Right.
realm. And even in that instance, there's some pretty good data that it's helpful.
Sure.
So it's not to discount using it just to kind of feel good, because there are real things that are changing in the physiologic nature of our brains that supports us going forward. And so you say like nothing's different after you do a trip or a
Right.
journey, except internally you are different.
Right.
You're passing energy in throughout your brain in a different way, and that
Hmm.
helps you cope with everything in life a little bit differently, a little bit better, and you get more of an opportunity to choose how you're going to interact with the world versus just being reactive to it, right?
Right. It's interesting to say that because initially I looked into it for writing, for creativity, but then
Yeah.
what I was finding, like really deep states of like crying and release, right? And so inversely, I'm like, well, maybe that will help me access those happier states or more ecstatic states in real time, like just sober. But I figured, well, maybe it will just, I don't know what's possible because I don't even know how to do it. But if I can get it done with some psilocybin in my system and sort of create those neural pathways, then at least they know they exist, that I have evidence that I can do it myself, and then try to relearn that myself, like just without it too. So,
Yeah, one of my favorite analogies, I didn't really plan on going there, but this
yeah,
is so perfect. So Michael Pollan, right, he wrote How to Change Your Mind, which is a
yeah,
phenomenal book, and also the Netflix series, which was just done beautifully.
yeah, awesome.
And it has time-lapse mushroom growth, which is like one of
Oh,
my
one of your
most
favorites,
favorite
yeah.
things in the world. So for no other reason, watch it for that. But and I don't think it was in the series, but in the book, he talks about using psychedelics, and his analogy was like sledding.
Mm,
So you've been sledding before, right?
yeah,
So pretend you have like a hill that has 2 feet of fresh powder on it, and it's a beautiful day and you're going to go sledding. So you grab your sled and you hike up to the top of the hill, and you set the sled down and sit on it, and you go down. You're like, oh, that was kind of fun, right? Like pretty decent. And so you want to do it again. So you grab your sled and you hike up to the top of the hill again, and you set it down in the same spot. And chances are you're going to go down that same groove, right? Because it was the
hmm,
path of least resistance. And also now you've created this path.
right,
So down you go, and you're like, oh, yeah, still kind of fun. And let's say you do it 100 times, right? And now that path is so ingrained, and the sides are so steep, and you can't go any other way. Like that is your only choice.
right,
So what psychedelics do is they flatten out that snow. They give you 2 feet of fresh powder. And now you want to go sledding. So you grab your sled and you hike up to the top of the hill. And when you set it down in the exact same spot, chances are it's still going to want to go down that way because it was the path of least resistance. But now you have choices. You can pivot and you can go down this way, or you can maybe go down that way a little bit and then turn, because now you don't have those barriers. So it
hmm,
makes, if sledding is like a neural pathway, right? The way that we're passing energy through the brain, then what psychedelic medicine does is it just gives you more access to different ways of thinking about it. Initially,
yeah,
you still have to go, I'm going to go this way, not that way, right? You still have to, it takes some energy to do that. But if you realize that going down the north side of the hill is healthier for you and you end up in a better spot, you can wear down that pathway intentionally so that you
right.
go there more easily.
No, that's beautiful.
So
I haven't read the book. I did watch the series, but that's a wonderful way to think about it. It's very easy to visualize, right?
I think it's really helpful when people engage with psychedelic medicine too, because if they have that vision of just being able, like, it's not going to happen automatically. Some of
Hmm.
it will, just because you're opening up the floodgates when, particularly with big journeys, like big doses.
Yeah.
But it helps to go, okay, I just have to pivot a little bit and get my toes sort of pointing in that right direction.
Hmm.
And then I can follow a new path.
It's interesting. Like I hear a lot about people having unpleasant trips or like, these trips that they don't like or it's too intense or whatever. It's
Yeah.
not something I've ever experienced, but I really feel like I'm fortunate in my medical background, just in crisis situation where I've known that I've not been at the wheel in so many different
Hmm.
instances. And with anything, with psilocybin for sure, I know that I, by choice, took a thing that will run its course over a set amount of time and everything will be fine. So, like, everything between then and now, I'm not concerned in the slightest, right? It's like, I know I just took a thing. So, whatever I see and experience in the meantime, it's just, I'm on for the ride, very similarly to like, I'm crashing in an ambulance. This is crazy and I have no
Right.
control about it, right? But at least in
Right.
this instance, it's a choice. So it's just to me, that's been the fun and the curiosity. It's like, how's this going to go? And regardless of how intense or, like I said, a lot of sad things have come up. And I know it's just passing, it's healing, it's all happening in real time. And to me, it's all exciting in the meantime, even when it's in
Hmm.
those intense moments. So anyway, it's one of the reasons
And
I love it.
I don't want to belittle bad trips because
Hmm.
they are very real. I think one of the things that you in particular are really great about is you have insight that other people may never develop that level of insight.
Mm.
And so with that, it's almost like you have your whole life has been a prep session. So when we
For
talk
sure.
about doing psychedelic medicine in the way that we're talking about doing it now, it's with it's with a lot of intention and planning and that sort of thing. And so what we do with other people to mitigate having a bad trip is really good prep, and just so that they are aware that I took a drug and now it's working, right?
Right.
So
Sure.
like
Yeah.
that whole thing and letting go a little bit, because people will talk about bad trips really being related to fighting the medicine
For sure.
and fighting that control, and it sounds like you're just really able to let go, which is a skill in its own right.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and that leads into another question I have. Where would you say your drive to facilitate that lasting change with people comes from? Like, does it come from your mom, kind of, or is there a particular experience in your life that comes to mind?
There's not a particular experience that comes to mind, really. I think what is the best fuel is seeing how people change their lives, right?
Mm,
So I come into medicine because I want to help people. And I've sort of come out of conventional medicine because I want to help people, right? So
absolutely.
like
Yeah.
I talk about bridging the gap between conventional Western mainstream medicine, which is prescriptions and surgeries and hospitals and all the stuff that's super important, super important. But then I'm bridging the gap between conventional medicine and natural healing. And that natural healing is really a mindset of using your environment, right? Like your external environment, your internal environment, and plant medicine, right? Some other holistic remedies and supplements and that sort of thing. But it's interacting with that in a way where you are meeting the medicine halfway, right? You're
Mm,
not taking a pill and expecting it to fix you. You're taking a pill or a plant or a capsule and you're doing the work so that it can work for you. And that's a
right.
very different paradigm shift. And when people are able to do that, oh my gosh, Bill, they are able to access a quality of their life that is so bigger and more meaningful and more peaceful
Hmm.
than they ever would have without that. So that is really where that's the catalyst for me. That's where I get my love of this, and I just know in my bones I'm on the right path because people are really changing their lives,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, and it's not a passive modality, right? From what I'm hearing, it's kind of that you're giving them the tools and then the tools to access the tools and know how to use them all at the same time versus like, as I mentioned right at the start, I don't really know what's happening, but there's a thing happening and it's positive. Great.
Yeah.
Connecting those dots with them, it's like, no, this is what's happening, and you are doing these, whether they're journal prompts or whatever that might be, right? Here are the things that you're doing, and you're deriving the outcome that's beneficial overall. And that's the empowerment piece. It's like, oh, I'm actually doing something by choice and it's working.
Yeah. And that skill set, then now that they get to keep that,
Yeah.
that's theirs forever. And so the way that they're going to interact with healthcare or wellness forevermore is going to be changed. It's
Yeah.
going to be better and
And
enhanced.
generational, right? They'll be able to teach that or help their,
Absolutely.
children or next generation, whatever that looks like too.
Yep.
Yeah, lead by example.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to, again, like I think there is such a place for conventional medicine. Like if you have, I mean, right?
Yeah,
More
I
than the next
wholeheartedly agree.
guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, like if you need
yeah.
antibiotics, like don't go chew on some grass. Like go have some antibiotics.
Yeah,
But there is a way of using, I think, the best of both worlds to
absolutely.
be better. Yeah.
Well, and in Canada, anyways, I fall in a lot of gray areas, and so I'm left on my own devices a lot of the time. It's like describe your symptoms or how you feel, and then I do, and they're like they don't know what to do about any of it. So like, well, you
Right.
seem to be managing it well, so check in later. But in the meantime, it's like, and all of this stuff is still very much my reality. And so what do I do about that? And
Mm-hmm.
that's just where I've literally my whole life has just been experiment all the time. Like, well, you're not experimenting, so I'm going to, because maybe something will help in the meantime. So that's, well, introduce psilocybin in many things, but that's part of the fun for me. Is like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that when a medical license is on the line for it, they're very hesitant to recommend things that they're unsure about, and rightfully so. Right. But
Yeah.
having that
And that
expectation,
Yeah, I've found that a lot. And I think that's why I have been successful in this position because people want access to plant medicine, but they can't go to their primary care provider and say, "Hey, I'm going to go, take some shrooms," because
yeah,
they're not trained in anymore. They're starting to get more and more,
right.
they're reading a lot of the same research, but it's not something that the two have been put together very often. And
No.
so there is that big gap between the two. And I think it's so important to empower patients like yourself to know themselves better and to safely step into some of that experimenting to really find out how to live a better life and cope with life better.
Mhm. Do you find, like, this is a side step as well, but I find that most people are very disconnected from their bodies in terms of like even being aware of what's going on, or growths or some sort of bumps and things like that. It's like things will go on for a long time before,
Yeah.
like, even a rash or something. Like, how long has it been there? I don't know, 6 months. It's like, okay, how do you
Yeah.
not notice
Yeah.
that there's a thing happening in your body, and just having a disconnect in a way to bridge back into finding your body and learning your body and listening to your body. Like, all of these things are invaluable skills just for longevity, period.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we've been indoctrinated a little bit to think like that because the more we know about the human body, like the more us medical professionals know, the bigger that gap is between people, they just go to their doctor to figure out what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And thousands of years ago, you had a shaman, right? Or you had
Yeah,
the
herbalism.
yeah, you had the oldest person in your village who had seen more and could give you some tips. And so the onus was really on you to know your body and what works. And in our lifestyle of comfort and ease that we now have, in
Hmm.
comparison with that lifestyle, we have gotten really out of touch with ourselves. And the way that we interact with medicine has become really impersonal. And so this is all about bringing it back, getting back in your body, right?
Right.
Bringing your consciousness back in your body and paying attention to those things.
Hmm. I'm going to take a left turn on the sense of consciousness. Have you ever,
Okay.
how would you describe your relationship with death? Speaking of the body, and then as a follow-up, have you ever had a near-death experience? That's something I found for myself every single time brings me into my body, and there's a degree of intensity that's unparalleled.
Yeah. My relationship with death is pretty close, right? So for healthcare workers who have worked in ICUs and emergency departments, death is part of our
Yeah,
job every
absolutely.
day. So in a lot of ways, I think, oh, and I'm probably speaking for a lot of other healthcare professionals, but we're not so afraid of death as we are afraid of being maimed and not
Right.
dying, right? Because we've seen some hard stuff.
Oh yeah.
As far as near death experiences, I have had a couple. Nothing really stands out, but what is interesting, and this might come from just working in high trauma environments where I compartmentalize really well,
Mhm.
but I don't really recognize it as near death at the time it's happening. And instead, it's in the following days at 2 in the morning when I'm thinking about it, realizing how
Right.
close it
Right.
was. And that is scarier for me in those
Sure.
moments than it is in the whatever, is happening
And how
that's
do you deal
scary.
with the feelings in that realization period then, in like in that aftermath almost
Yeah, I
for
mean,
yourself?
debriefing is something that we do in hospitals a lot when something
Sure.
horrible happens. And it I think we get, like I said, really good at compartmentalizing, and we get a little bit callous.
Right.
ER providers in
Yeah.
particular have kind of twisted senses of humor, and we have
Yeah.
to commune in that way and connect with one another, because otherwise it's too sad and we just can't come back to work the next day.
Hmm.
So I think in that debriefing process, kind of walking through things and going, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, and what are we going to do different next time, and then having that community
Right.
is important, because if you go through something hard and you're isolated, it's 10 times harder than it needs to be, right?
Sure. Well, that's what is it? Oxytocin in the terms of shared experience as humans. And that what comes to mind is a friend of mine who's like an ambulance attendant, and that's
Hmm.
very similar. There's only what two of them in the ambulance, I think, right? So it's if you don't have that ability to sort of offload the craziness that you're dealing with, it's very, as you said, isolating and like, what do you do with it all? Because you just carry it around. In my mind, I envision you just offload it onto somebody else, and it's like a game of juggling, and then eventually it just drops, right? Versus now you just hold it forever, waiting to be able to share it and yeah,
Yeah,
offload
it's a
those
very
thoughts.
heavy burden to hold by yourself. Yeah.
Sure.
Hmm.
One thing that I hear a lot in the psychedelic space is sort of this term of ego death. And one thing I think about when I think of ego is identity. And so I'd love to
Hmm.
hear for yourself personally how you've integrated lessons from your work with psilocybin into who you are.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about ego death is it it sounds kind of like a negative thing, like death.
Mm,
We don't like to talk about that, but ego death is a really beautiful phenomenon that happens. So just to talk about that a little bit,
hmm.
you're totally right. Ego is identity, and that goes back to Freud, right? And
Right.
so when you have ego death, it's really the way of describing that detaching from identity. And
Mm,
that allows somebody to feel both close and not a part of everyone else and nature and God and universe and spirit,
right.
right? So it's being in community or communing with everything around you and also nothing at all.
Right.
And that can be really beautiful because it shifts perspective. So it's a little bit of an aha moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just a blip, right? Or I'm
Yeah.
just part of a bigger picture.
I'm a grain of
And
sand on the beach.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that can be a really healing perspective for people to just zoom out that far.
Mm,
And when it's done in a really safe, intentional way, it can really be a beautiful experience for people. And so having had that happen for myself, I can say it's very hard to describe. We'll see
yeah.
people try and put these words in, right? And with ego death or communing with spirit or whatever it is. And
Hmm.
I don't think our English language does it justice because it's something else.
Yeah.
But it's a really beautiful thing that can happen.
It's in terms of words, like that's something I've said to myself for a long time, is the words are just a laughably inadequate tool that we have to describe our inner experience with our outer world. And like
Yes.
it can be very frustrating to try and do that, right? Because until some sort of AI or higher consciousness happens, the only way for me to have any hope that you understand what I'm saying is finding the right words with the right tone, and you're hearing them in the right emotional state, that you're open to hearing them, right? There's all these factors that come into
So many
play,
variables.
and it's just there's so much opportunity for miscommunication and misinterpretation, and it's
Hmm.
just like in terms of ego death, it's like, and none of it matters because we're all one. Just like, and that's where I
Yeah,
like presence. Presence to me is a superpower, because we literally can change lives just by being present with somebody else, right? You don't have to say anything.
absolutely.
And that's an interesting power that I find some people, well, one, it can be uncomfortable, right? Silence is this other aspect of being in this world where it's like, what do we do with all this silence? Well, you just enjoy
Hmm.
it a bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sharing that energy without
Yeah,
trying to confine it with language.
absolutely. What exactly? Because how do you describe it? Like it's just like a sunset, right? If we're looking at the same sunset, there's no way that I can describe that to you or you to me. You have to see it,
Yeah,
right? Everyone's different.
yeah.
Now, going into a bit of spirituality, one question I'd love to ask you is, what is your definition of God?
Mm. Yeah, that's the question, right?
Right.
I really see God, and for some context here, I was raised in a Christian environment
Hmm.
and am no longer choosing to
Sure.
identify with that group. While I think there are good things about it, I tend to have more of like a Unitarian belief system now. But I think God is really seeing ourselves in one another and
Hmm.
our environment around us and some of the themes around us and having that resonate with who we are deeper.
Right. No, it's interesting. I did a podcast a couple ago with a buddy of mine who's went to university for religious studies and these types of things, but his definition of God was essentially it's everything and nothing all at the same time. And
Which
that to
is like
me
ego death, right?
would and that exactly to me it's exactly the same language. So that's where it came into semantics in my mind. It's like we're talking about the exact same thing here, because that's
Yeah.
also very much my definition of God. However, I don't see it through the Christian lens. I see it similar to you. It sounds like it's more of that Unitarian, we are everything and nothing. But
Hmm. Which is why people will journey and say that they met God or they became God because
yeah,
they stepped into that space of everything and nothing all at once.
right. That
Yeah.
we're always in all the time, but you just have to be able to bring it in and accept it, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Now, in terms of God, thinking of one of the most difficult things you've ever experienced, what did you find yourself leaning into for strength? Just for context, like, because I find a lot of people, when you're in the hardest times of your life, people will pray to God and just to find hope. And I've never
Hmm.
found that to be the case for me. And so I find it very interesting asking other people, like, what is that experience like for other people? What do you do?
Yeah. I mean, for strength, I tap into family, right? And
Hmm.
I'm not talking like your nuclear family necessarily. I'm very lucky that I have wonderful parents, but I can say I'm not close with everyone in my
Yeah,
nuclear family, and family is complex. So when I say family, I mean people who feel like family, right?
right. Absolutely.
The people that we make family. And going back to community, right? Those are the things that get us through is like sharing one another's burdens. And so that's helpful. Also, we touched on this, but like humor and silliness
Yeah.
is super important. Actually, I'm going to share another story.
Yeah, please do.
I didn't plan on sharing this either, but this goes perfectly with it. So I was working in the emergency department with one of my colleagues who is just a like renowned physician, and we were running a code, right? So that's when somebody's trying to die and we're trying to
Crashing, yeah.
keep them from dying. And codes can get really hectic, and you'll kind of like throw off your lab coat and get in and do compressions or something. And so my colleague takes off his lab coat, and a little rubber chicken falls out of his lab coat pocket.
Okay.
And we're in the middle of the code. So I just scoop it up, I put it in my pocket, and I'm gonna give it back to him later. And so anyways, we save the person, right? He goes off to the ICU. And afterwards I come up and I'm like, this fell out of your pocket. This is
Yeah.
a tiny little chicken. And he told me that it was given to him by one of his chief residents a long time ago. And he said, it just keeps you humble. It keeps you from taking yourself too seriously because, like, you have a chicken in your pocket. You
Sure.
can't take yourself that seriously.
Right.
And he ended up giving me that chicken. And for the rest of my ER career, I had a little rubber chicken in my lab coat
Yeah.
pocket.
Just
I
chilling.
still have it somewhere, but it was a good reminder that like life is hard for everybody, right? And if
Yeah.
we don't find some silliness or like find something to like laugh about, like having a
Mhm.
chicken in your pocket, then the sparkle is gone.
Yeah,
And
the
so
luster
those golden
disappears.
moments are important. Hmm.
That's fun. I'm reminded too, like in terms of silliness, it's something that I find helpful with co-regulation too, right? If you're in even speaking exactly as you are about these offloading sessions of weight, right? Through intense periods, you have the aftermath. But one way to get back into a more regulated nervous system, I find, is laughter, right? There's these other things like
Absolutely.
warmth and whatever, but that's in a group setting. Laughter can be a beautiful equalizer for everyone, right? We're
Yes.
all the same if we're all laughing tears of joy, right?
Right.
And
And finding something humorous together
yeah,
and tapping into just play, right? Like we've
absolutely.
gotten so far away from play in our society. You know, working hard and working overtime is so glamorized now
Right.
that we forget to just be playful and silly and have a sense of humor. So that has been something. I mean, it's not always easy to tap into, right?
No,
Like,
no.
but I think it's an important thing to weave into our lives when we can.
Well, like a rubber chicken.
Like a tiny rubber
Yeah.
chicken in your
Did it
pocket.
squeak? Was it like a squeaky one?
No,
No, because that'd be fun.
no, that would be a little inappropriate, I think,
Yeah, you
in
bend
certain
over wrong.
hospital settings.
Um, I'm curious on if you have any concepts or ideas that you've changed your mind on lately, or if anything comes to mind.
Not so much that I've changed my mind on, but been surprised about
Hmm.
is how ready society is to talk about psychedelic medicine, right?
Right.
So I have felt this very strong pull towards it for 4 years now, and
Hmm.
it gets stronger every year. And I believe wholeheartedly I'm in the space where I need to be. But I have been hesitant, right, to have some of these conversations because there aren't a lot of us that have a foot in both health realms.
Right.
And um, so as I've tiptoed into it and had more conversations, I've been really surprised how enthusiastic people are to learn about it, to learn about themselves, to tap into that. So I think there's this, they kind of say it's a psychedelic revolution right now.
Yeah.
And I've heard that term thrown around through some of my trainings, right? But I'm really feeling it now. There's this energy with people who are just sort of fed up with the way things
Hmm.
are going and are ready for something new. And I think this is going to be a big part of that new healthcare environment. I
Right.
hope so, right? It needs to be.
Yeah. Well, and to bring back some
Mhm.
of that vibrancy as we're talking about in terms of the lightness, it's that how do we access that lightness on a broader scale through a healthcare lens or a not a sick care lens, I guess, right? It's
Yes.
that the lens of healing.
Yeah, wellness, right?
Yeah,
And
yes, absolutely.
yeah, and I think with wellness, it's not so much a state as like a process, right? Where
Mhm.
you're continually monitoring your behavior and reassessing it and
Mhm.
pivoting where you need to, and then monitoring that and having this general trend towards being better all the time, right?
Right.
Feeling better emotionally, physically, spiritually, right? All of it
Yeah.
is you can't parse any one of those out. And so that path of wellness, right, which is why I called, my company the well-being, is
Right.
because we want to be well. And
Mhm.
that doesn't mean just right now. That's a state of existence.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. What comes to mind for me is happiness. A lot of times I find people have this state of happiness as something that they chase, but at least for me, it's always been a peripheral thing that I know will happen if I'm walking the path of being the man that I know that I want to be. Happiness will
Hmm.
happen as a byproduct along that path. And so instead
Yeah.
of focusing on happiness, like I really truly don't think I could care less about being happy in general. Because it's just you're looking to me, it's I'm looking at the wrong thing. I'd rather look at fulfillment and vibrancy and connection, right? These are the things I
Yeah.
would much rather like, how do I cultivate this in my life? And happiness is like, great, it'll come and go, and life is because it's the ebb and flow of life. So we can't,
And being open to that lets it in, right?
right?
if
Yeah.
if it's the end goal, then you're going to miss all the little joys that trickle through your life every day.
You're right. And similar with wellness, right? You'll never get there. You're never well enough. You're never happy
Right.
enough. And so it's a matter of literally for me, it's putting the definition of, well, how much is enough, right? What are we shooting for?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of the quotes I like that I've seen on your page is the magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding. And I'm interested in to hear in what that means to you and just what brought that into your work.
Yeah, I think I love that quote too. It's big, right? So I think part of that is just looking at conventional medicine, right? You're looking for a lot of people are looking for somebody to fix them, right?
Mhm.
Like this hurts, give me a pill so it doesn't hurt anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so the magic that you're looking for isn't in the prescription or the surgery or the right, or even it's not even in the mushroom, right? It's not even in the ayahuasca retreat,
Right.
but it's in the work that you're avoiding by looking for somebody else to fix it for you.
Hmm.
And we've all had dark parts of our lives, right? And sometimes many dark parts. And it was in a dark part of my life where I I was working a ton, I didn't realize I was standing in a burning building because I was just head down working and I was
Yeah.
doing all the things for all the people and it wasn't sustainable. And when I finally tapped the brakes and pulled back, put out the fires and just like took care of my heart, care of my well-being, right? Through meditation and mindfulness and journaling and therapy and community and psilocybin
Yeah.
and
Nature.
really yeah, nature. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And let myself take care of myself. I found more healing. I did more work and more healing than the rest of my life up to that point.
Right.
And really the well-being was born through that period where I realized that this is something I'm absolutely charged with bringing to other people in a safe way so that the world can be a better place, right? I know that
Absolutely.
sounds very grandiose, but I really believe that if
Yeah.
we can make each person just a little bit better or parts of our community healthier,
Hmm.
kinder, more loving, more patient, right? And
Yeah.
having us all work together, we're going to be successful. Our world is going to be a better
Absolutely.
place.
And
Yeah.
that's literally one of the things I'm doing right now is a community meetup group once a month. And the basis of that is the exact same belief. I believe that when the individuals in a group thrive, the group will then thrive. And so how can
Yes.
I help facilitate the individuals to thrive? And that's it's an infinite potential for change in that. And that's like not theoretical in my mind. It's very tangible change in every second of every day, right? If you have that vibrancy in your life, you're a different person by definition all the time. And it's like,
Yes.
I can't think of a better way to change the world,
Yes. And it's
right?
accessible,
Right.
right? It's not pie in the sky
And
dreams. This is all accessible for every person.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody, and that brings me to the next question of I believe we all have natural gifts. And right, we have things that we bring to the world naturally that a lot of the time we don't get to tap into very much, right? And so I'm curious, what would you say some of yours are? What are your natural gifts that you're bringing to the world through your practice and through your clients and what you're working on?
Yeah, I love that question. I don't think we're asked enough, like, what are you really good at?
Mm,
I what comes to mind first is kindness. And
mm,
I was fortunate to be shown immense kindness throughout my childhood. And from that, I learned how to bring that everywhere with me, right?
right.
So I'm a very kind person. And what that has allowed is for me to provide tough love, I think, in a way where people can receive it
Hmm.
because they know I'm right. Sometimes the most kind thing you can do is not to agree with somebody,
Yeah.
but is to actually call them on their shit and, help them sort of realize where they are. And if you can do that with kindness,
Hmm.
you can communicate that love and that tough love by helping
Yeah.
people and, getting them on their path. So as people are trying to get well, and they're in very vulnerable states, right? Like I know I get into the weeds with people, really
Hmm.
some dark stuff, and you have to go through that stuff in order to get through the
Yeah.
good stuff. Kind of like you're saying, in order to tap into your creativity, you had to have some crying jags, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because you have to get those blockers out. And so in those moments, I think I am gifted with the ability to be loving and also hold them accountable and potentially give them a new perspective with which to look at their problems
Hmm.
so that they can manage it better.
Do you find one thing I find for myself is it's intention based when it comes from, as you're saying, from kindness, and people know that it's not coming from a place of judgment, it
Hmm.
hits differently, right? It doesn't mean the same thing. And I find
Totally.
it very difficult out in the world generally to find people who are coming from positive intention. It's like,
Hmm.
I care for you so much that I'm going to be authentically true and honest with you, and you maybe don't want to hear what I'm going to say. But it's that it's coming from a place of kindness and caring, not from a place of better than or,
Right.
you should do this. It's like, look, you're fucking up, and here's why, and they know that you mean it and you're not attacking them. Or it's like, and I'm here with you, I think is the piece of
Yeah.
that a lot of the time is missing. It's like you're on your own, good luck. It's like that's not the case at
Hmm.
all, right? And that gift, kindness and connection and that warmth. Warmth is a word that comes to mind for me all the time.
Yeah.
Um, but that's something that I see in you for sure.
Thank you. Yes, it's a cold world. And so I think when we can share that warmth, it's more important sharing that warmth than almost anything that you could say
Yeah.
because people just want to be acknowledged and seen,
Well, it goes
cared
back to the
for.
presence that we talked about before, right? Just being in the same space as someone, that warmth can be felt. You don't need the words. You don't have to find them,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's something I don't know how to articulate that. I don't really know that we need to, right? Now,
Hmm.
kind of shifting one more time into you've been working on a program, a 16-week program, some psilocybin microdosing to my understanding. Could you
Yes.
walk us through an overview of what that entails and sort of how someone listening might know if it's a good fit for them?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. I think the I'm going to answer the last question first. If
Sure.
people know if a program like microdosing psilocybin or even doing a psilocybin journey or an ayahuasca retreat or peyote or, LSD, any of these psychedelics that we're talking about. I work primarily with psilocybin, but there's absolutely a space for all of the others.
Mm.
People are going to know that it's right for them if they're feeling a pull. If there's some curiosity there, I think, not to get too woo woo, but we have to honor what the universe is telling you, and it speaks through intuition, right? And so this whole idea about knowing yourself better is paying attention to those little longings that you have,
Right.
that little spark, right? That little glow, that little pull towards, if if you hear the word psilocybin and microdosing and mindfulness and you like perk up a little bit, like
Yeah,
that
you hear the
that's your
magic.
sign. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that is how you'll know. You'll just know. And then so I do have a 16-week program, and I have three different tiers of handholding, essentially. So three different tiers of support. One is self-guided. So I give you all the tools. I've written a guided journal, I've written a workbook, and it's all science-based on just what has been shown in publications and literature and research
Hmm.
to really kind of get you to the crux, right? To the real healing issues so that you can come out the other side of it just
Yeah.
beautifully. So I have that. And then I have one where you have a few calls of support calls. So, and then one's weekly. So with that middle one, it's about like, it's every 3 weeks you get a support call just to make sure you're on track and your questions are being answered.
Yeah.
And all of the programs start with a full medical assessment, right? So that's really what I bring that's so different than a lot of other people in this space is I
Hmm.
do a comprehensive physical medical assessment intake. And that includes what ends up usually being about a 90-minute call where we really drill down all the meds and supplements that you're taking, and then I
Yeah.
come up with a prescription, right? So, like,
Right.
what I think is going to be the best schedule, course, dose, anything
Right.
for you. And sometimes that is suggesting that somebody go do a journey, right?
Hmm.
And I can like help them with that. Or it's doing 3 or 4 months of microdosing on a certain schedule and doing that as part of a mindfulness practice, which is what that 16-week program is.
Right.
And I also just do the medical assessments for other psychedelic facilitators in this
Oh,
space who don't have a medical background.
right.
So, I have somebody in California who's going to do a retreat, but anybody who's on prescription drugs, she refers to me and I do a full intake and make sure that they're going to be really safe
Yeah.
to go then journey with her. So that's something that I do as well.
That, no, I might have to take you up on that too, because that's something in terms of DMT and things. That's really one of the bigger drivers why I haven't looked into it too much because I am on a lot of pharmaceuticals and I don't know
Yeah,
how DMT affects things like heart rate and, interacts.
it
So
definitely does. So
yeah, I had
that's
a feeling.
another podcast episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So just in terms of practicality for my own interest, where do you distinguish between a microdose and a macro dose for, is there a generalization there?
Yeah, so if you can feel a microdose, you're not microdosing.
Sure.
So the whole idea about a microdose is we use the word subperceptual, right?
Right.
Under perception. So you might have a little bit more energy or like a little bit more creativity, but you're not seeing unicorns and
No.
tasting colors, right? That's reserved for the bigger doses. But there really is, when we talk about macro doses, that's getting more to something we call a hero dose. So that's a
Sure.
big like ego dissolution, go
Yeah.
commune with the cosmos dose. And then there's a big range. before you get to a microdose. So microdose is typically like 1/10 to 1/20th of that big dose.
Right.
So
I'm
some of
wondering.
the ones that we've talked about with you is you've been doing what I call a meso. So
Yeah.
micro, meso, and macro, right? So
Yeah.
is
Right.
that meso dose where you can really get into some good personal work and unpack some stuff and really tap into some beautiful things, but you're not fully,
No,
you know,
I'm not dissolved.
you're not dissolved.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's something that certainly with your medical history and people who have ongoing medical conditions should be something that they should absolutely talk with somebody who understands the medicine that they're going to do or that they're interested in and can help them do it in a safe way. Sometimes it's stopping a medicine, like one of their daily medicines for a short period of time if they
Mhm.
can. And if that needs to happen, then they can suggest something else that's plays better with that plant
Right.
medicine that they want to do. Ayahuasca is one that virtually plays well with nothing.
Yeah.
So, that's when people really need to be careful with it. It's a wonderful medicine, but it's intense and it has a lot of more physiologic side effects too.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess another one for my personal, I take trazodone, which is an SARI, I believe. Is there a general rule of thumb of how, well, really psychedelics, but psilocybin interacts with an SSRI versus an SARI in
Yeah.
terms of making them more or less effective and that sort of thing?
So psilocybin interacts with one of the serotonin receptors.
Yeah.
So yes, your question is appropriate, is how does it interact with it?
Right.
There has been some research, I think it was Celexa was the SSRI that it was studied along, psilocybin was studied alongside, and the results were very favorable
Hmm.
in that they can be used and sometimes are better used in
Sure.
combination with one another. Typically, I have found that people on SSRIs do need a little bit higher dose since it's
Right.
competing for receptors. And that's something that a lot of people wouldn't be for a macro dose session. Um, you can get into realms of dosing that most like psychedelic facilitators wouldn't be comfortable with
Sure.
because they're on an SSRI. So
Yeah. Is there
that's
now?
something that I definitely take into account.
I feel like I've heard something about serotonin, like in terms of not a hangover, but almost in terms of like an aftermath the day after. Are you uh like depleted of serotonin or something like that the next day?
Not with psilocybin.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
But with other
Mm-mm.
psychedelics, that can be the case.
Yeah, you can with
Yeah.
others. You
Interesting.
have a recovery day and you'll
Yeah.
plan for that.
The
Mhm.
integration piece,
Integration, yeah. So that's something that can last
a long
a
time.
day or a century,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
there are
Yeah.
things that come to the surface in psychedelic work that can take a while to unpack and really understand. And it will change your perspective on the way that you interact with your life from that point forward.
Right.
And some of this can be like repressed memories or trauma or things like that. And so having a facilitator that you really trust and you can really be vulnerable with is the safest way to integrate after a psychedelic journey.
Yeah. Well, and I'm reminded of kind of go full circle back to you being able to offload with your coworkers after a code or after a crisis
Yeah.
situation. It's that debrief period
Yeah,
in a safe space. That's a
absolutely.
nice full circle.
Yeah, we did
Yeah, to
it.
bring us around to my final question. Um, they say that what has got you to where you are isn't what's going to get you to where you want to go. And with that, I'd love to hear about how your internal dialogue has been shifting lately and how you see it shaping as you move forward into this next chapter of your life.
Mm. Yeah, my internal dialogue is changing a lot. I am a very good medical provider. I'm a
Mm,
really good clinician. I'm a really good psychedelic facilitator. I am learning how to be a CEO. And so
sure.
that has really been right. So you and I have talked, I've hired business coaches and mentors, and I am really focusing on practicing heart-based medicine
Right.
as an entrepreneur and a CEO. And so that's really been kind of my shift for this next, that's my stretch goal, right? Like
Yeah,
that's, I'm filling those shoes as I walk the path.
sure. Learning the entrepreneurial path.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah, and I
thing.
guess historically as nursing, like you would work within a hospital structure, right? So it's
Yeah.
not so much been entrepreneurial career really, but now those potential or those options have really opened up.
Yeah, you stepping outside of corporate medicine,
Mm,
you have to wear a lot of different hats with that. And
right.
it's a beautiful process and I love it and I absolutely would not change it. And there are
The
challenges.
learning curve.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. It's different gifts that are maybe less natural to you. Yeah.
Hmm.
And also to me, by the way. So yeah,
So we will learn together.
that's right. Well, that's what we're doing.
Yeah,
Um, are you currently taking on clients?
I am.
Yeah.
Yep. I
Okay.
have with virtually all of my programs, the weekly calls 6-week program is I start that on a quarterly basis. So
Sure.
that's already started. So that group, if somebody wanted to join that, they would just have to start the next one, which I think is going to be in June.
Hmm.
And then all my others, I get you can start at any point. So
Rolling. Sure.
yeah,
What's
yeah.
the best way for people to get a hold of you?
That would probably be Instagram right now. And my
Okay.
handle is wellbeing 24/7, 365, because that's what we're going to do.
That's the way
And
it
I
is.
have a website that's in the works. Hopefully, in a couple weeks, it'll be stood up, and that's youarethewellbeing.com.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, this will be out probably, yeah, a week, not next week, the week after. So maybe right in tangent with your website launch.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yes.
great.
Perfect.
Uh, I appreciate you coming on, Allison. I really appreciate your time, and it's been just awesome sitting down and talk to you again.
Yeah. We could talk for hours about this, but
Well,
I
that's it.
very
I'm
much
trying to be
appreciate the
mindful.
connection.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. You have a good one.